Hello, BookTube. Welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Vin, and today I'm going to be talking about my TBR for the Middle Grade March Readathon. So, I'm fairly new to BookTube still. One of the things I very quickly became aware of are the monthly or sometimes weekly or all these kind of readathons and events that go on throughout the year among different sections of YouTube. And there's definitely some that have caught my eye throughout the year that I think I want to participate in. And one of them that's coming up next month, I'm filming this in late February, next month is Middle Grade March, which is a focus on middle grade literature. And at first, I didn't think that would really include me. But then I started thinking about it more, and I have an 8-year-old son. He and I read together a lot, especially at night before bed. So I'm reading middle grade all the time. And that's not really exactly what I wanted my focus to be when I'm talking about a TBR. I realized that there were a lot of middle grade books that I missed growing up that I kind of wanted to get exposed to get some background of. There are also some that I read when I was very young that I felt like I kind of need to brush myself up on again to remember, because these are things that my son will probably be reading as well. And so even though he and I read a lot of stuff together, there's also things that I want to be able to read and pass on to him and have conversations about it, because I want him to also become an independent reader and to read a lot of stuff on his own. But I still want to be able to be a part of that. As I said, we usually every other night I read to my son. I alternate between my son and my daughter. So when I'm reading to him before bed at night, my wife is usually reading to my daughter. And then the next night I'll read to my daughter, who's 4 years old, and my wife will read to my son. So we kind of go back and forth. And over the past couple months with my son, we've read some Goosebump books. I missed Goosebumps. Right when Goosebumps was becoming really big and popular, I was young. I was like a tween, but I was already trying to read Stephen King, and I had moved on to adult horror at a pretty early age. So Goosebumps was not something that was desirable to me. I didn't really watch the show. I did watch Are You Afraid of the Dark on Nickelodeon. That was more my jam when that stuff was going on. But just to catch up, again, I have an interest in horror, so even children's horror interests me. My son and I were reading Goosebumps. He's also been having more of an interest in history, so we picked up a bunch of the I Survived books. This one's I Survived the Battle of Gettysburg. He's been asking about a lot more historical information lately. And at first, what brought this up was he asked me to read with him what was the Battle of Gettysburg. He got a whole collection of these and also the I Survived books for Christmas. And we tried reading this, but I did find that even though it's written, it's simplistic enough for the most part, it's still too big of a topic for him at least for my son, 8 years old, 3rd grade, to really wrap your head around. Just to try and explain to him exactly what the Civil War is difficult. So there was just too many names to try and keep track of and to try and visualize what was going on. So instead we read this, and we just finished this, and he really enjoyed this. So I think that in order to introduce him to some more historical topics, we'll continue to look into these I Survived books. But he brought another book to me last night, right after we'd finished this, that he wanted to read next. And that's kind of what prompted me to start thinking that maybe I should try the Middle Grade March readathon, because one of the books he brought to me that he wanted to read was one that I had missed as a kid. So I'm going to go through the 5 challenges of the Middle Grade March and tell you what books I'm picking. I'm not going crazy. I'm not being super strict with this, but this is an opportunity for me to kind of fill certain gaps, especially with childhood classics or children's classics that I've either haven't read or I've forgotten, and I'm going to be returning to one old favorite just to see how it holds up. The first challenge in Middle Grade March is a book with a silhouette on the cover. So I am going to read for that The Secret Garden. And here you can see lots of silhouettes on here. So I figured this qualified. I do have a memory of reading this in 5th grade. So I was about 10 years old. However, I don't have a very strong memory of this book. I remember a girl kind of coming from British India, moving, I think, back to Britain. There's a garden. I think there's maybe another young kid. It's very muddled to me. I do have a friend who had recently talked about this as this being one of her favorite childhood books. And then she tried rereading it with her child, and she was kind of, she found certain old-fashioned ideas a little bit awkward and kind of difficult to relate to the kid. So I thought, you know what, I hardly remember this book. I see it pop up sometimes, people talking about it still pretty fondly. I figured, why not take the opportunity? I have a copy. I'll just read it for this. So that's the first prompt, all right? A book with a silhouette on its cover. The next prompt is a book with strong family elements. I'm stretching for this one, but this is the book that my son brought to me asking if we could read it. And that is Roald Dahl's Matilda. I saw the movie, years ago, but I do remember there being a very strong focus on like found family, with Matilda kind of getting this mother-daughter attachment to I think Miss Honey or something like that, and that was kind of part of the heart of the story. I never read this as a kid. The Witches by Roald Dahl was one of my favorite books of all time growing up. I love that book, and my son's been eager to read this one, so I figured, I'm going to consider this a book with strong family elements, and this will be part of my middle grade March TBR. The next prompt is a book featuring travel or adventure. This is, some of these books, people are going to wonder, how the hell did you never read these? And this is probably one of those. And this is a Peter Pan, right, by J.M. Barrie. Never got around to reading this as a kid. Of course, I've seen all the different, a whole bunch of different film adaptations. But never got around to reading the original. And like I said, found a copy at Goodwill. It was also a 50% off day for Blue, so this is like a 50-cent book. Just grabbed it, figured I'd give it a shot. Childhood classic. You don't get much more fairy tale or adventure than Peter Pan. Or actually, no, sorry, this is the travel and adventure. I have another one. The next one is my prompt for fairy tale retelling or has fairy tale elements. This definitely has fairy tale elements. Another one that most people watching this have probably read, and that is C.S. Lewis, The Magician's Nephew, the first book in the Chronicles of Narnia. Again, 5th grade, the same year that I know that we read The Secret Garden, we also read The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I have fairly strong, I think, memories of that one. I remember liking it. I haven't read any other C.S. Lewis fantasy fiction. I've read some of his criticism. I read Mere Christianity, his apologetics and stuff. But never got around to reading this as a fantasy series. And I figured Magician's Nephew, it's supposed to be the first in the series. I know it's not the first one that was written. It's more like the prequel. But it kind of explains why there's like a lamppost in the middle of the woods and those kinds of elements. So I figured, what the heck? I'll give this a try. And if I like it enough, I'll just go through the series. But this will let me know if it's worth continuing to go through. I haven't shown my son the movies yet. I did enjoy the first 2 movies, definitely. I did not really like the 3rd movie. I know, of course, there's a lot of Christian parables in this, and I was totally fine with them for the most part. The 3rd one, I didn't like the cousin character. He kind of felt like just a straw man atheist character in there. That I didn't think was very well written. So if I get to that book, maybe I'll like the book better. But anyway, this is the fairy tale elements, which I hope I can't go wrong with that. And finally, the last one is a revisit from a book that I really loved as a kid. And probably one that kind of helped introduce me to ideas of historical fiction and also Gothic literature and all of that wrapped into one little mystery. And I'd like to see how it holds up, so I can eventually pass it on to my son. And that is The Man Who Was Poe by Avi. Haven't read a lot of Avi. Hopefully, I don't even know if I'm saying the name right. But this was one that really struck me. This is a boy in Baltimore, and his sister is kidnapped out of a room, and he can't figure out what happened to her, and he's in search for her. And he meets this guy who has some demons, some drinking problems, is pining for a woman, and of course it's Edgar Allan Poe. And he somehow convinces Poe to help him try and find his sister. So they're going through Baltimore trying to figure out what happened to her. I just, when I was a kid, I just devoured this book and I loved it. And you know, I still think that it's a cool idea. And now that it's been, you know, at least 20 years, I'd like to see, actually more than 20 years, almost 30 years since I read it. Figured I'd see how this thing, you know, stood up to time. And I didn't even say what this prompt was. This prompt was a book published in the decade you were born. And I was born in the 80s. This came out in 89, so it just barely qualifies. So those are the books that I'm planning on. And it's not going to be the only middle grade books that I read, because I'm going to read other stuff with my son. But these are the ones that I planned on reading at some point anyway, and I figured I'll get it over with, and it'll fit the prompt. So we got The Secret Garden, Matilda, Peter Pan, The Magician's Nephew, and The Man Who Was Poe. So if you're participating, and you know, if you have any strong memories of any of these books, I'd love to hear about them. All right, next book, dude.